Hey guys, Mr. Farmer here again today. We are on chapter 24 of AutoCAD. This chapter is dealing with multi-view drawings. We're finally here, multi-view drawings. This is kind of, in my opinion, probably one of the most important topics that you're going to learn about in AutoCAD. This is where it all kind of comes together. You're going to use all the skills and tips and tricks and techniques that you've learned to provide a 2D representation of a 3D model. So if you think back to early in this class when you were still sketching by hand, we started doing multi-view drawings, and that shows three views of an object. It shows the front view, the top view, and the right-hand view, as well as kind of an isometric up in the corner, so that you can see all three faces of the object on a 2D sheet of paper, but they represent all three dimensions of the part. So if you want to grab your old engineering notebook and look back at, sorry about that, if you want to look back at when we were doing multi-view drawings by hand, it'll probably come in handy for this unit. So, chapter 24, multi-view drawing. By the way, I'm going to do two videos on this chapter. One is to go through the chapter to get you ready for your quiz, and then I'm going to do a separate video of me just going through a multi-view drawing from start to finish, so you can see some of the techniques that I use. So, objectives. We are going to be able to draw projection lines using ortho, snap, and polar tracking. Be able to use X-line, ray, and offset to create construction lines. Be able to use object snap tracking for alignment of the lines and views. It's very important that all of your views line up and they're the same size. Be able to use construction layers for managing construction lines. Be able to use line types, line weights, and layers so that we can draw everything to those ANSI standards. We're also going to be able to create and use the center mark and center line commands. Know how to use fillets, rounds, and runouts. And then finally know the typical guidelines for creating a three-view, multi-view drawing. So let's go ahead and jump right in here. All right. Multi-view drawings, let's go through some vocabulary here. Multi-view drawings are used to represent 3D objects on two-dimensional media, a sheet of paper or a computer screen or what have you. Now, our technology has developed a lot over the years. So we're using a pretty advanced piece of software to do this. Way back in the day, they didn't have this. They would do this by hand. So although the technology has changed, the techniques and the guidelines are still the same. So to give you an example, I've got a textbook here, an old engineering textbook from the 1950s, and it's going over how to do orthographic projections or multi-views by hand. And check it out. It is, I don't know if you can see that, it is the same techniques that we're going to be using. So this is from the 50s, way back before computers were mainstream, and they're using the same techniques that we're going to be using today. So although the technology has changed, the rules and the guidelines are still the same. Yes, okay. So let's go ahead and get started. I've got just an AutoCAD template here. I'm going to set my limits to, let's get this going here. I don't know, 22 by 17, and then I'll take my grid and show limits. So there's the sheet that I'm working with, 22 by 17. And I'll take my grid and put it on, I don't know, half-inch increments, and set my snap to half-inch increments so it kind of snaps to this. I've got a nice little grid to work with here. And then if you remember, we're always going to start with that lower left-hand corner, right? So I'm not going to do a shape right now. I'm just going to start with like some frames. And I'll say that this frame is going to be, I don't know, 6.5 by 4, right? So this is kind of where my front view is. And then to get to the other views, there's a lot of different methods you can use. You can use the ortho. That can be used with object snap to draw projection lines. Those are like your construction lines, if you think back to what we did with pen and paper, or pencil and paper. You can also use object snap. Object snap is where, well, let me just give you a review here. This is where you can select where you're going to snap to on any geometry, the endpoint, the midpoint, center point, tangent, parallel, that kind of thing. That's object snap. That's very useful. So I'm going to turn on ortho. That's on. And notice when I draw a line now, if I draw here, I can only draw vertically or horizontally using ortho, right? Now that goes away if I've got object snap on, right? If I've got object snap and there's another one of these that's selected, that will override the ortho command. That will override ortho. But I've got ortho turned on right now, so I'm going to draw a vertical, we call this a construction line, up here, right? And then I'm going to use that to guide my next point. So we'll say this is 6.5 by, 3. So here's kind of my top view. And then what I can do is I can trim this construction line. It's gone now. Does that make sense? So these are lined up. These are lined up on the left-hand side. Yeah. And then they're lined up on the right-hand side. These objects have the same width. And I'm going to go ahead and label these real quick. I'll start the text right here. And text. Let's put it here. And yeah. This is the text height. Sorry guys, I'm struggling this morning. Let's make this, 3/4 of an inch tall at 0 degrees. And we'll say this is the front view, right? You should recall that from earlier this year. Which means this is the, take a guess, top view of our part, right? Okay, so we're moving right along. I'm going to move this down just a little. I don't want to rotate it. Okay. And then you will recall we need a projection line that goes out at a 45-degree angle from our front view. Now I've got ortho still turned on, so I need to turn that off. This is where polar tracking comes in handy. Remember, polar tracking, you can set the desired angle of the drafting settings. So polar tracking is down here. I can set it to 30, 60, 90, 45, 90, 135. I'll set it to here. And then I'm going to draw another line coming out of this front view at 45 degrees. So this is a construction line. I'll just send it all the way up here at 45 degrees, right? Okay, now I'm going to use this to ensure that my top view and my right view have the same depth. So I can draw some construction lines again. I can go from here to here and then straight down, right? And then I can go from top view to that projection line and straight down again. And then from the front view, I can get my height for that part. So I can go from there to there. I can go from there to there. Now I can use the trim tool to really kind of start going through here and cleaning this up. Trim, 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 trim. Perfect. So this will be my top view, right? Hopefully you remember this. If this is new to you, we need to go back and do some refresher work, right? So that's one method to do this, right? Your front view, top view. Oh my goodness, I've messed up. You guys let me mess up. This is the right view. Oh dear. Right view. There, that looks much better. Okay. So object snap tracking, so this is one method to do it. You draw the lines and then you trim the lines, right? You can also use object snap tracking. So let's delete this, and let's put our 45-degree line back out there. 45 degrees. Object snap tracking. So object snap. I'm going to say midpoint, perpendicular, parallel. Looks good. So when I do a line tool now, you'll notice, see this dotted line here? Right? I can use that dotted line, that object snap tracking, to go over to my projection point, right? And then straight down from that point. So here we go. Now I don't have to draw that line all the way, right? And then I can object snap track all the way over, and I've kind of got the outline for where this is going to be. Hopefully that makes sense. So this prevents a little bit of the unnecessary trim work, and you end up with the same. You end up with the same shape. Now I have to do a little bit of trimming, but not as much as I did before. Okay, that's one method. Another method. Let's see another method. You can use X lines to box in. So X lines, or rays, as were discussed in a previous video. You can create the construction lines for those. They can also be trimmed before your finished view. And then here's a method I really like. We could take, so remember we have different layers, right? So we can create a new layer. Let's see here. Let's create a new layer. Okay, and we'll call this construction lines. Yeah? Construction lines. So you can see that new layer there. Okay? And we can draw our lines on this layer. This is actually pretty cool, right? So I'm doing what I did before. These are my projection lines. Project, project. Good. These are all the projection lines. And what I'm going to do now is go back to my original layer and draw this little square here that represents my right-hand view. And I can go to construction lines and I can actually freeze that layer, and that will all go away when I plot, right? So, construction lines, oh dear. You can freeze that layer, and then when you create a layout, those pieces are not even going to show up. All right, let's try this again. So I drew my projection lines on this construction liners, right? Construction lines. And I drew my box on the current layer. So I can go over here and I can freeze or turn off a layer, right? There we go. And then I'm left with this. So the benefit here is I don't have to do any trimming at all because all of my projection lines are on a different layer. So that's really handy. Okay, let's move along here before we run out of time. How are we doing? Okay, a couple minutes. Let's say somewhere in your drawing you have a circle. So let me get rid of this text here. Let's say we have a circle here in the middle of this view, and it's a 1-inch diameter circle. What is that going to look like up here on my top view and my right view? Well, what we need to do is draw those construction lines, right? Uh-oh, I need to turn off this center point. Yeah. Here's what it's going to look like. I can draw a line here and draw a line here, right? And then we're going to draw a line here, draw a line here. I'm being lazy. I'm using the method that requires you to trim, even though I showed you a few other methods. Trim, 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 trim. So, okay. So we got this hole that goes all the way through here, and it shows up here and here. Now, obviously, we don't want to use the same type of line here because it looks like it's cut out. So I need to change this line type to something else. And that is going to be, let's see here. All right, I'm back. I had to load the line type that I needed. So these are not going to be regular lines. These are going to be these little dashed lines right here. Right, so I changed my line type to hidden. Hidden is the line we were looking for. So hidden line, and we're going to draw these up and over. Let's get rid of these. Very good. And then we can use our trim tool. Trim, trim, trim. There we go. So we got these hidden lines, right, that represent where this hole or this circle is drilled through. So let's see here. Remember, there's continuous lines, hidden lines, center lines, all different types of lines. You can use the LT scale tool. The LT scale When it's been optimally adjusted for the drawing globally, use the Properties palette to adjust the line type scale of individual objects. That's for plotting, right? And then, so a couple of commands. First is center mark. So center mark, there you go, center mark. I can select a circle here, right? And a center mark will pop that little center mark on there. That shows where the center of that hole is. So if I was dimensioning, I could dimension from the center over here and show how far that is, right? You always dimension to the center of your circles because that's where they're drilled. Okay, well, what does that correspond to over here on this hidden line? Well, that is going to be a center line. So I can select this side, and it will put a special center line on there, and you'll notice that that lines up perfectly with the middle of my circle, right? So likewise, center line here and here. Very good. So anywhere you have a circle or an arc or anything like that, you always have a center mark to show the middle of it. And then that corresponds to a center line where that hole is extruded through your material, okay? Center mark, center line. There's also some tools you can use to modify this. So you probably saw center extension. This shows how much overlap you have on these little lines here. The default is 0.12. I could change that to 0.25, and you'll see how that changes it. A little bit more extension here, a little bit more extension on the ends of these. See how they kind of poke out from the side there to show you that that is indeed a center line. And then last but not least, we're going to talk about fillets, rounds, and runouts. So a convex corner is called a round, like when something's rounded off. And then a concave corner is called a fillet. The fillets and rounds are created easily using the fillet command. So here's fillet. I can select here and here, right? And then select a radius. So I can make it, I don't know, 0.25, right? We're going to use the fillet command to do this corner. So I'm going to specify my radius first. Let's go fillet and radius. We'll make it a 1/2 inch radius, okay? And then I'm going to select this line and this line. There you go. You can see how that's rounded out. Would that change your view here or your view here? No, not necessarily, right? If I changed my top view, right? So let's put a fillet up here. Fillet. We'll make this one a radius of 1 inch. So this side and this side. Would that change anything? Yes, that would change the curve of this leading edge here. You would see that only in the top view. So that's a fillet, right? Or what some people would call a round. Okay. A runout. Runout is just a visual representation of a complex fillet or round. For example, when two filleted edges intersect, so like this and this, a runout should be drawn. And then, last but not least, you may see these little V-shaped marks. V, like a capital V. If you see that on a drawing, that just means that it's a machined surface. It's supposed to be a very smooth surface. Okay? That's about it for this video. I've gone a little over time, but you get the basic idea of how a multi-view is set up and how it's projected, and different ways to use construction lines and layers and tools such as ortho, object snap, that sort of thing. So, in the next video, I will show you how to go through and make like a complex multi-view of an example shape, and hopefully that'll clear up any questions you have remaining. As always, feel free to shoot me an email if you have a question, and thanks for watching.